It is not just one area, it is everything at the same time. You know exactly what I am talking about. It is not that phase where one thing goes wrong while the rest holds up. It is that specific period, which perhaps is exactly what you are living through now, where finances tighten at the same time and important relationship fractures, health begins to show signs you should not ignore, the sense of purpose becomes obscured like dense fog, and beneath all of this, there is a silent anguish of time, the corrosive sensation that you are late, that the years have passed too quickly and the destiny you felt you had still seems too far away. When it is one thing, you find the strength to cope. When it is everything together, you begin to wonder if the problem is situational or structural, if what is wrong is the circumstance or the configuration. And I will tell you now directly before anything else, the second hypothesis is the correct one, not because of your weakness, not for lack of faith, not for an error of character. The configuration has been compromised. The system has been interfered with. And that is exactly why an order was given, not suggested, not considered, not put to a vote, a direct order, with authority that admits no contestation. Reset everything. Not a punctual adjustment, not a marginal improvement in one area while the others remain compromised. A complete reset, a reconfiguration of every parameter that was corrupted. And this process has already begun. Before you clicked on this video, before you woke up today, before you had words to describe what you were feeling. In the next few minutes, you will understand not only what is happening, but how the specific mechanism of this reset works, and what you need to do to not resist the process that is underway in your life now. There is a scene in the scriptures that is perhaps the most powerful image of a reset that human language has ever recorded. It happens in chapter 37 of the book of Ezekiel, and it begins with a question that shocks by the brutality of its honesty. The prophet is led by a vision to a valley full of bones, human bones dry, scattered everywhere, and the text makes a point of detailing that they were very dry. Not recent bones, not something that still held some moisture of recent life. Bones that had been dead long enough to retain no external sign that they were once something other than what they appeared to be now. And God asks Ezekiel the question, "Son of man, can these bones live?" It is a question that on the surface seems obvious in its answer. Of course not. Dry bones do not return to life. Completely corrupted systems do not regenerate themselves. Destinies that seem dead long enough do not simply wake up one morning and resume what was interrupted. The logical answer, the answer that any rational observer would give given the scenario, was no. But Ezekiel did not say no, and he did not say yes either. He said, "Lord, you know it," which is possibly the wisest answer a human being can give in the face of a situation that exceeds the capacity of their own analysis. It is not the answer of naive faith that ignores evidence. It is the answer of intelligent humility that recognizes there is a dimension of reality that does not fit into what the eyes can measure. And then comes the command that changes everything. Prophesy over these bones. Do not wait for conditions to change. Do not monitor signs of improvement before acting. Prophesy now. Speak to the dead reality as if it were already different from what it appears to be. And Ezekiel prophesied, and there was a noise, and then a rattling, and the bones began to move, first joining one to another, then receiving tendons, then flesh, then skin. But there was still no life. The visible process was complete, but the essence was still missing. And then the final command. Prophesy to the wind. Say, "Come from the four winds, O wind, and breathe upon these slain, that they may live." And the wind blew, and those who were dead stood on their feet, an exceeding great army. This process has a structure that mirrors exactly what is happening in your life now. And each phase of this process has a Hebrew name that you need to know, because naming the process is the first step toward not resisting it out of fear of what is not understood. The first word is bara, B-A-R-A. It appears in the very first sentence of the sacred text. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and the verb is bara. The common translation is created, but Hebrew precision goes beyond that. Bara is not the act of building with existing material. An architect uses material and a project, and what he does is magnificent, but it is not bara. Bara is the creation of something where before there was literally nothing. Not a reorganization of what existed, not a reform of what was damaged. Creation ex nihilo, from non-being to being, from void to full, from absolute zero to concrete existence. And bara is specific in the scriptures. It only appears with God as the subject. No human being practices bara. No human force, no skill, no intelligence creates in the sense of bara. Only the one who existed before everything can create from nothing, because creating from nothing requires that you need nothing to begin. What does this mean for you in concrete terms? It means that the reset being executed in your life is not limited to what you already had and lost. It is not a recovery of what was. It is bara, the creation of what has not yet existed in your trajectory. Configurations that never operated, not because something you should have achieved was missing, but because the time for bara had not yet arrived. And now it has arrived. Researchers at USP in studies on neuroplasticity in adults over 35 confirmed what was for a long time considered improbable by classical neuroscience. The adult human brain not only retains the capacity to form new neural circuits, but under certain conditions, especially when combined with perceived purpose and pattern disruption, this capacity for profound reconfigurations is dramatically amplified. In direct language, the human nervous system has the capacity for bara, to create configurations that never existed before, not just to restore what had been. What you consider too late to change is, from the point of view of contemporary neuroscience, still within the window of fundamental reconfigurations. But bara is accompanied by a second word that describes what happens when the system begins to receive the new configurations. That word is chaya, C-H-A-Y-A-H. It means to live, but with a nuance that simple translation does not capture. Chaya specifically describes the act of returning to life after having been without it. It is not life that continues without interruption. It is life that resumes after a pause that seemed definitive. It is what God did for the bones in Ezekiel's valley. It is what happens when bara finds what had died and declares it operative again. In Psalm 80, verse 18, one of the most honest cries of the scriptures appears, "We will not turn back from you. Give us life, chaya, and we will call upon your name." And in Psalm 119, verse 50, "This is my comfort in my affliction, that your word has given me life, chaya." It is not cultic rhetoric. It is the record of real people in real affliction who found at a certain point that something that had stopped working inside them, hope, disposition, operative faith, the will to continue, started working again. Not slowly, like a cold engine that warms up gradually, with a speed that surprised, with an intensity that had no explanation by external conditions, because external conditions had not yet changed when chaya was already in internal operation. Have you felt this? I am not talking about an emotional worship moment where the music helped. I am talking about that specific instant, sometimes in a completely ordinary place, sometimes in the silence of a moment alone, where something inside you simply returned, a certainty that did not depend on external proof, a disposition that had no logical reason given the scenario, a fire that you had given up for dead, and that suddenly was there again, with an intensity that surprised you. This is chaya in operation, and if you have never felt this, that is what the reset is opening space for. If you have felt it but saw that flame flicker afterward, what I am going to reveal next is what makes the difference between a temporary spark and a permanent reconfiguration, like this video now. If what you are hearing is making sense, if you recognize the sensation of a compromised system in multiple areas at the same time, like the video. Because what comes next is where most people do not reach, and that is exactly where the key to the reset that does not turn back lies. There is a man in the scriptures who understood the logic of systemic reset in a way that no other biblical character documents with such strategic precision. His name is Nehemiah. And the story of Nehemiah begins at a point of total collapse, not the collapse of one person's life, but the collapse of the identity of an entire people. Jerusalem was in ruins. The walls that defined the city, that gave it protection, identity, the boundary between what was sacred and what was external, those walls were torn down, The gates were burned. The people who still lived there inhabited the space without a perimeter, without protection, without the structure that made it possible to be what they should be. Nehemiah was a high-ranking official in the court of the king of Persia. He had position, he had access, he had comfort. And when he heard of the situation in Jerusalem, the text records that he sat down and wept. He did not weep for a few minutes as a circumstantial emotional response. He wept and fasted for days. He felt in his body the weight of what was destroyed. And then he did something that distinguishes the reconstructor from the merely concerned. He stood up, assessed with precision the extent of the damage, and developed a specific plan for each compromised section. Not a generic approach of, let's make things better. Not stage spirituality without ground strategy. Each gate, each section of the wall, each point of vulnerability received specific attention, designated people, and a reconstruction protocol. And the entire wall of Jerusalem, destroyed for decades, considered impossible to be restored by those who lived looking at the rubble, was rebuilt in 52 days. What Nehemiah understood, and what you need to understand about the reset that is underway in your life, is that the process is not abstract and uniform. It is specific by area. Each compromised zone has its protocol. Each burned gate has its restoration process. And trying to solve everything with the same generic approach is what produces the kind of effort that exhausts without rebuilding. There is a Hebrew word that is at the center of all systemic restoration theology, and it is especially powerful because it carries within it both the diagnosis and the solution. That word is tikkun. T-I-K-U-N. It comes from the root takan, which means to correct, to straighten, to repair. Tikkun is the concept of repairing something that was out of its original alignment. Not destruction and reconstruction from scratch, but the precise return to what was designed, to the original adjustment, to the functioning that corresponds to the project, not to the distortion that time, environment, or interference produced. In deeper Hebrew thought, Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world, is the description of the broader human purpose. Each chosen person is an agent of Tikkun in some dimension of reality. And before any person operates as an agent of repair outwardly, Tikkun happens inwardly, in the internal configurations that were distorted, in the patterns that were compromised, in the systems that operate in corrupted versions of what they were designed to be. The reset being executed in your life is Tikkun, not a surface aesthetic adjustment. It is the reconfiguration of the deepest lines of code, the beliefs that guide perception, the patterns that guide choice, the internal narratives that filter what is possible and what is not. Researchers from the Federal Council of Psychology, in partnership with teams from UNIFSP, mapped what they call access sabotage patterns, deep cognitive configurations, formed in most cases before the age of 21, that continue to operate as reality filters in adulthood, even when the person has rationally overcome the circumstances that generated them. In practical terms, you can have completely changed the external environment, worked for years on personal development, accumulated real achievements, and still find an invisible ceiling that does not yield because the filter that created it is still active in the deepest configurations of the system. Divine Tikkun acts exactly in this layer, not on the surface, not on observable behavior, in the configurations that determine what behavior can produce. And now I need to tell you about the biblical character who impresses me most when the subject is systemic reset. Not for the grandeur of purpose, because there are others with more epic callings, but for the honesty of the collapse and the specificity of what happened afterward. His name is Elijah. Elijah was the most powerful prophet of his generation, someone whose word closed the heavens for 3.5 years, someone who faced 450 prophets of Baal alone on Mount Carmel and saw fire descend from heaven in response to his prayer. Someone who by any available spiritual metric was operative, confirmed, and powerful. And then came a threat from a woman named Jezebel. A threat, not an army, not a battle, a message with a death threat. And Elijah, the same one who had just seen fire from heaven, fled. He ran a whole day through the desert, lay down under a tree, and asked to die. "It is enough, Lord. Take my life." The system entered complete collapse, not for lack of calling, not for lack of a proven history with the divine. Because of accumulated exhaustion that the victory at Carmel had not resolved, it had only temporarily covered it. And what did heaven do in the face of this collapse? Not preaching, not exhortation to have more faith, not a reminder of everything Elijah had achieved to motivate him to stand up. What arrived was an angel, who touched him and said, "Arise and eat," because there was warm bread and fresh water beside him, not mystical revelation. Food. Elijah ate. He slept. The angel returned, touched him again, and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for your strength." He ate again. He slept again. And with the strength of that food, he walked 40 days to Horeb, the Mount of God, where the real reset happened. At Horeb, God did not find Elijah in glory and power. He found a man in a cave who said, "I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away." Not just tired, convinced of being completely alone, completely without relevance, completely finished. The system had generated a narrative of absolute collapse that did not correspond to reality. There were 7,000 who had not bowed to Baal, but Elijah could see nothing beyond his own exhaustion. And what the reset produced in Elijah was not the restoration of what had been. It was a new commission. Go, anoint Hazael, anoint Jehu, and find Elisha. 3 specific actions, a new phase with new instruments. The Elijah who left Horeb was not the Elijah who had entered. He was a reconfigured version with precise purpose, with clarity about the next steps, without the weight of what had consumed him before. This is what the reset does. It does not return you to what you were before the collapse. It delivers you to a version that could not have existed without the collapse. Subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell, because the next series of videos will enter into each specific area of the reset, finances, relationships, health, purpose, with the depth that each of them deserves. And you will want to be there when each episode comes out. Subscribe and activate the bell now. But now I need to talk about the aspect of the reset that creates the most unconscious resistance, and that is responsible for more people interrupting the process than anything else. It is the aspect of time. In the Greek of the New Testament, there are 2 distinct words for time. The first is chronos. You already know it. It is the root of chronometer, chronology, chronicle. Chronos is sequential, linear time, which advances 1 second after another, regardless of what happens within it. It is the time the clock measures. It is the time that has aged you biologically. It is the time the calendar records. The second word is kairos, K-A-I-R-O-S. And kairos is not the time that passes, it is the time that arrives. It is the opportune moment, the instant of specific pregnancy where an action produces a disproportionately greater result than the same action would produce at another moment. In ancient Greece, kairos was the word used by archers for the precise moment when the bowstring reaches the right tension for the perfect shot. Not before. The arrow does not reach the target. Not after. The tension has already passed. Kairos is the window. In the scriptures, when the promise appears that God accelerates time, that what should take years can happen in months, that what seemed like a journey of decades can compress into a season, it is not promising manipulation of chronos. It is promising access to kairos, the alignment with the moment of pregnancy, where every movement produces a disproportionate result. And there is a third Greek word that completes this understanding. It is anakainosis, A-N-A-K-A-I-N-O-S-I-S. It appears in Romans 12, verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing, anakainosis, of your mind. Anakainosis is not a cleaning of the old. It is the installation of something structurally new in its place. It is the update of the operating system, not the cleaning of viruses in the old system, but the replacement of the base architecture. It is exactly what the reset promises for each compromised area. Not management of existing financial scarcity, anakainosis, a new architecture of understanding about abundance, about flow, about value, about what you carry that the market around you has not yet correctly named. Not administration of toxic relationships, anakainosis, a reconfiguration of discernment that changes what you attract before changing what you choose. Not treatment of the installed disease, anachinosis. New parameters of vitality that restore the original project before any deterioration. Researchers at the HeartMath Institute documented that states of high heart coherence, produced by genuine gratitude, by perceived purpose, by clear intention, measurably alter not only internal physiology, but the way the individual perceives and seizes opportunities in the environment. The electromagnetic field of the human heart in coherence extends beyond the physical limits of the body and affects the immediate environment in ways that quantum physics is beginning to describe with greater precision. In direct language, when the internal system enters anachinosis, the external environment begins to respond in ways that are not explainable only by conventional cause and effect mechanics. What the world calls luck, perfect timing, the right hour, is often the convergence between a reconfigured internal system and a kairos that was already available, but that only became accessible when the receiver was operating in the correct configurations. Comment below the word reset. Just that RESET. It is your recognition that the process has already begun, that the corrupted configurations are being replaced, that Bara is creating what has never existed before in your trajectory. Comment reset now, and see how many others are recognizing the same process in their own lives at the same time. Now I need to tell you something that will seem contradictory to what you would expect to hear after everything that has been said, and it is exactly for that reason that it needs to be said clearly. The reset is not passive. The image of the control room, of the screens being reconfigured, of the process happening while you exist, this image is real in spiritual terms. The decree was given, the order was issued, the reconfiguration is underway, but the reset is not a spectacle that you watch from the outside while waiting for the results to appear on the screen. Ezekiel had to prophesy. Nehemiah had to assess the rubble, plan the reconstruction, and designate people for each section. Elijah had to stand up, eat, walk 40 days, and receive the new commission. In each case, the divine reset summoned a specific human response. Not effort that buys the result. The result has already been decreed, but active participation in the process. Movement that corresponds to the reconfiguration that is happening in the invisible. And what is the movement that your specific reset is summoning now? This is the point where most people need honesty that discomforts, because there is always one area, usually the most important, usually the one that scares the most, where the person is waiting for more certainty before moving, more confirmation before taking the step, more security before acting from the new configurations. But Tikkun is not completed in the wait for perfect certainty. Nehemiah did not wait for a complete survey of all risks before starting. He assessed what he could assess, prayed, planned with what he had, and began. Half of the gates were rebuilt, while the other half was still rubble. Data from Datafolha, in research on decision behavior in Brazilians over 35, revealed that the greatest factor of immobility in this age group is not the absence of opportunity. It is an excess of analysis fueled by a history of attempts that did not produce the expected result. In other words, the more times a person tried and did not see the return, the more the nervous system begins to demand guarantees that reality does not offer before movement, as a protection mechanism. The system is trying to protect the person from another disappointment, and in doing so, it also protects them from any movement that could produce a different result. The Tikkun in this specific area, the area of analytical paralysis, begins with a step smaller than you think it needs to be. Not a dramatic leap of faith of the kind that testimony stories usually romanticize. A step, an email you were procrastinating, a conversation you knew you needed to have for months. A small decision that, if taken, opens the space for the next one. Bara does not require you to see the complete destination before taking the first step. It requires you to take the first step so that the destination becomes visible. And there is a specific principle in the narrative of the scriptures that appears in reset contexts with a consistency that goes beyond literary coincidence. Generosity as an activation protocol. Not generosity after the reset has produced a bountiful result. Generosity in the middle of the process, when resources are still tight, when faith is still being rebuilt, when external evidence has not yet confirmed what the invisible has already decreed. Elijah, before the fire of Carmel, was sent to a widow in Zarephath who was using her last resources to prepare the last meal for herself and her son, and she was asked to feed the prophet first, with the last she had, and the promise was that the oil and the flour would not fail as long as the drought lasted. The tikkun of abundance in the widow's life began the moment she let go of what seemed to be the last. This is not spiritual exploitation. It is a principle that economic neuroscience documents independently. The internal state of those who believe they have enough to give produces decisions and perceptions of opportunity radically different from the state of those who believe they are in definitive scarcity. Generosity, when practiced as a declaration of abundance and not as a transaction for a result, reorganizes the perception system. FGV recorded in studies on economic behavior in Brazil that entrepreneurs and professionals who maintain donation practices during periods of financial pressure show not only faster recovery, but access to networks and opportunities that remain invisible to those operating in retraction mode. The reset is not waiting for you to have sufficient resources to be generous. It is activating abundance through generosity practiced now, with what you have now, in the conviction, not in emotional certainty, in the conviction based on the decree, that Bara is creating what Chronos has not yet recorded. Share this video now with someone you know is in the middle of a period where everything seems to have gone wrong at the same time. Not after finishing, not when that person's situation improves, not when you feel more secure that the content will help, now. Because this is the kind of message a person needs exactly at the moment when there seems to be no way out, not after the way out has already appeared. And before closing, I want to give you the last piece, the one that integrates everything that was said and tells you concretely where you are in the process now. The reset has phases, and people who do not understand the phases of the process frequently abandon the reset exactly when it is closest to completing the cycle. The first phase is the darkening. It is when the old system goes offline before the new one has fully uploaded. It is the most frightening period because it seems that nothing is working. What worked before, even if poorly, stopped working, and what will work later is not yet visible. Most people interpret this phase as defeat and give up exactly here. The second phase is the noise. It is the sound Ezekiel heard before seeing the bones move. It is not the result yet. It is the sign that the process is in active motion. In this phase, small confirmations arise, too small to call a miracle, too large to call a coincidence. An unexpected conversation, a door that opens in an unusual place, a thought that clears where there was fog, a piece of data that arrives and fits. If you are in this phase, pay attention. The noise precedes the rattling. The third phase is the rattling. It is when the new configurations begin to solidify in a perceptible way, not complete yet, but undeniable. Finances begin to move where they were stagnant. A relationship that seemed dead shows a sign of life, or one you did not expect appears. Health responds to a treatment or a change in habit that produces a result beyond expectations. The clarity of purpose that was obscure begins to take specific shape. And the fourth phase is the wind, the complete chaya. When the visible process has already been completed and the spirit breathes upon what was reconfigured and declares, live. It is the point where you look back at the process and can see that each phase, including the frightening darkening, was necessary for the result to be exactly what it is. You are in one of these phases now, and what you do in this specific phase determines the speed with which the process advances to the next. If you are in the darkening, do not interpret it as failure. It is the old leaving before the new enters. Maintain the decree, maintain the movement, maintain generosity even with what seems little. If you are in the noise, pay attention. What is arriving in an unusual format may be exactly the sign you asked for in a different format than you expected. If you are in the rattling, do not slow down for fear that it is temporary. What you are seeing is the new structure consolidating. Continue in the same direction. If you are in the wind, you know, and the responsibility now is not to keep the process to yourself. What you lived and understood is the map for someone who is still in the darkening and needs to know that this is not the last phase. Because that is how Tikkun multiplies. A reconfigured person becomes an agent of reconfiguration for others. The individual reset becomes waves of restoration that propagate beyond the reach of any personal planning. And the bara that created something unprecedented in your trajectory becomes a reference of possibility for those who still do not believe that the impossible can enter into process. Activate the bell now, because in the next video I will reveal something that will change the way you understand the delays in your life. There is a specific pattern in the scriptures that shows that what seemed like the greatest waste of time in your trajectory was, in fact, the accumulation of an invisible capital that is now going to be released all at once. The weight was not empty. It was accumulating something that you are about to receive, like a payment that matured with compound interest. Activate the bell and do not miss this. And comment now the word reset. One word. It is the recognition that the darkening is not the end, that the noise is a sign, that the rattling is real structure, that the wind is already arriving. Comment reset and record that you were here when the process gained a name, a structure and a direction. The reset has already begun, and there is no cancel button.